In the East End, the men of Scotland Yard's H Division were no less motivated to work than they always were. A group of men huddled within the room of a flat, energy prevalent, observing a collection of documents at their center with a vibrant focus quite opposite to the drabbery of their surroundings. Oh, this is new. The subject, the murders which had come to terrorize even the desensitized streets of Whitechapel. They called the bringer of new nightmares Jack the Ripper, but no one knew if he was a Jack, or if he was even a man, frankly. The Ripper had no name, no face.
Now then, we know that each murder has taken place between midnight and 6 a.m. The Whitechapel district must be thoroughly patrolled in those hours, lest we miss any clues. Without conclusive evidence scene after scene, we're left with no choice but to catch the killer in the act. Yes, sir! Now, a few words from our Special Deputy Commissioner.
Please don't have a face. Please don't have a face. Oh, it's you. Thank goodness for the Deputy Commissioner. You're allowed to have a face. Whew.
Thank you. A good day to you, gentlemen of Scotland Yard. Your task is to find and apprehend Jack the Ripper as soon as possible and ensure the people of London can sleep safe in their beds once more. To that end, I have reviewed your patrol routes, and after deliberation I've made some modifications. These will allow for a more efficient method of patrolling Whitechapel's streets.
Amongst the documents spread across the desk was a map, which Sherlock Holmes then used to point to where needed.
Our task is an urgent one. The people of this district, who grow tired of their apprehension, cannot avoid fearing this abomination of a human, be it day or night. Paranoia is rampant. Urgency means immediacy, men. Inspect with haste, for we're limited in how long we can use the manpower from other parts of the city. If we're to strive for the ideal, it would be to catch the Ripper before he strikes again. However, we are dealing with one who is capable of murder before his victims can make a sound, and he is as silent as they upon death. Do not rely on your ears. Cast your doubts on everything you see, every person you pass. Report whatever you find out of place, however small. That is all. If there are no more questions, you may leave for your posts.
The room bolstered with affirmation from the officers before they retired, leaving the few who stayed behind in a much more comfortable position to breathe.
I pray this will finally be the deed that catches the monster. Oh, they will. That was my order as their superior.
Indeed it was! And let me tell you, it's lighted a fire beneath us all to have you lead us, sir!
Do you take issue with having me as your superior, Ryan?
Father, if you would enlighten me.
Certainly. I've been appointed Special Deputy Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police for the duration of this case.
Their shortage of talent must be getting rather dire if they've given that honor to you.
That's the pluck I need. Care to share your thoughts on the killer, Junior?
To state the obvious first, they're adept with handling blades. They're also familiar with both the human body and the geography of this area. Though we've assumed up to this point the victims were murdered in silence where the bodies have been found, we cannot rule out that they've been murdered elsewhere, and merely planted at their final resting place. Motivation currently eludes me. The victims were poor, which means they don't murder for money. It could be a threat for someone else, to silence them specifically, or as revenge.
I see. And you intend to find out how much of that is true with your own eyes?
Naturally. Sir! Mr. Holmes! Would you like to hear my analysis too? Ryan, where did you get that mountain of papers?
Ryan spread the far too many papers he conjured across the desk with spirited smacks, and enthusiastic directing to specific names, which appeared to be organized in a list.
Ah! You blasted idiot! You'll mix those in with the others!
Mr. Holmes, I've given some thought to the psychology of our culprit.
Have you? Do go on, Ryan. The deuce! Don't you ignore me!
That they've been targeting only prostitutes suggests they may bear some sort of grudge against them. We've an endless number of potential reasons for resentment. He may have been a former client who was cut off. Or they were abandoned by their mother as a child out of necessity. If it were the latter, there's a strong possibility the culprit would have been taken in by a workhouse. And that is why I brought a record of every single person who was in an East End workhouse. I'm sure our culprit is among one of these names.
Like, since when, though?
But there must be hundreds of people listed here.
Watson, overwhelmed from the sight alone, began glancing through the name registers with the hesitation of a man who was at a loss on where to begin.
There absolutely are a lot of names, but I swear that I've been racking my brain for a method to narrow those down.
A fine way to spend your time. Rack your brain whilst the body count increases. I find your analysis rather brilliant, Ryan.
You do?
The inspector does make a fine point, however. Time is against us, and this is only in the case of the latter being true. What would you do if it were the former?
Oh, well, I suppose I would have to search around the hard way.
Bloody brilliant!
Holmes paid the absolute minimal amount of attention he could spare for their conversation, all as he flipped through the pages of the name registers. He was considerably less overwhelmed about it than his partner. Well, he can filter through a whole bunch of them based on evidence he's gotten from the case so far.
Can't be.
His hand stopped. Is Jack in there?
Holmes? Something wrong? No, it's nothing.
What did you see? He then disregarded the entire pile, dropping it back on the desk.
Do you think the next victim will be another prostitute, Holmes?
I mean, 3? Once doesn't mean anything. 2 is maybe a coincidence. 3, I think you can start seeing a pattern emerge.
It's likely. If another murder were to occur, that is. And that is something I will not allow. I will bring these murders to a close. Right. We've got loads of officers patrolling the area, so I'm sure one of them will find the culprit.
Holmes ignored this word of hope, instead picking up the register he had only just placed down.
I want to believe that Jack Miller's here is unrelated to the one we know. Mr. Mackenzie did mention he was born to a poor family in the East End, which means the odds that he was in a workhouse before his adoption are high. Bah. That alone isn't sufficient enough reason to suspect him.
What had caught Holmes's attention more was his absence from class. To call it a rarity on Jack's part was an understatement. It was a first. Was his disappearance now nothing more than coincidence?
The smell here is revolting. Perhaps it's because of the abattoirs, and I do recall there being a knacker's yard nearby. So our noses are no more able than our hearing.
The window was layered in dust, but Holmes could still peer well enough through it to observe the streets of Whitechapel. Even if the window were immaculate, the buildings beyond were blackened with soot. The streets were dull, and its people more so. No matter where he looked, there was filth. The truth had plenty of hiding places.
It pains me to doubt a friend.
Really? Holmes considers Jack a friend. Not just a classmate, not just a peer, but an actual friend.
Yet, Miss Whiteley, I still want to know the truth. Even if Jack the Ripper and Jack Millers are the same man, I want to know. I just dearly hope I'm wrong.
Aw, he's worried about his girl. How sweet. In the library of Harrington Academy, Lupin and I had grown very comfortable reading through all the books we could get our hands on. I was not expecting to work with Lupin on this, but it's kind of nice. If I was limited to experiencing the East End through the eyes of others, then I was grateful to the many who chose to pen their research and lives. We gathered as many books on the East End as we could before reading certain passages aloud to each other.
The Industrial Revolution brought about great prosperity and modernization to Great Britain.
Oh, look at that.
Subways began to run as a popular form of underground transit in London, transporting its more than 3 million citizens from destination to destination within the city. Whilst new inventions created a number of conveniences for the modern man, it also split society into two distinct classes: the wealthy and working, and the former working class who were plunged into poverty. This shift happened at the same time Jewish immigrants flooded into England from the continent in hopes of escaping massacres. This boom in technology, and thus job opportunities, saw labourers making their way from rural areas in the north to London to find work, adding more to the city's increasing population. With more people looking for work than there were positions available, stability in both employment and housing buckled to a fine point, forming what we know as the crime-infested and odorous slums of the East End. London's West End became reserved for the fortunate, with an ever-changing, rich culture to populate its mansions. The East End, meanwhile, resorted by necessity to publicly owned abattoirs and meat factories, becoming a prime cornerstone for the impoverished. The pork and beef that feeds the comfortable are produced in mass quantities every day by those who can barely afford to have them on their plates. Furthermore, the knackeries for the horses which pull London's carriages and taxi cabs exist in large numbers there. The smell of death and blood hangs in the air as a permanent fixture. The total population has been estimated to be 200,000, the majority of which live in terraced homes, commonly with entire or even several families crowded together under a single roof. Those unable to find regular work are left to clearing away rubbish, general cleaning, or doing any odd jobs as they move between doorhouses with what little money they manage to pocket.
I think Lupin talked more in that in that section than all of his route. Like, dang, he's really reading a big chunk here. I mean, thank you, my dude, but wow.
It's so awful. It is. And yet there are 10,000 people who live by even worse standards. They're the very bottom of society. They clothe themselves in unwashed rags. Many walk the streets with their feet bare, unable to afford a pair of shoes. With no means of an honest, stable living, they wander the streets begging for coin, committing thefts, and whatever else they can do to survive. The ones who manage to endure the hunger pangs and complete a day's worth of manual labor can hope for, at most, just enough food to fill their stomach. They don't have anywhere to call home. All this has led to the area transforming into a hub for corruption. Gangs of criminal activity now flourish. Power here is not for the good man to manage, but for the monster to take. They will do anything for money. Pickpocketing, larceny, mugging, and even
murder.
Indeed. The time they don't spend on crime, they spend fighting amongst one another for the profits produced by the East End. It's terrible in every regard. In a sense, the women murdered during this case are victims of more than their killer. They were victims of London's Industrial Revolution and mass consumerism as a whole.
If I may, Lupin, did you ever find it difficult being friendly with Jack? I was timid with the question, which may have unnerved him more than if I were straightforward.
Yes, what? No, I wouldn't go that far. You know, I was blessed with a good family, the chance to attend this academy, and friends as well. Jack is from the East End, but in a certain way, he's fortunate to be attending here. There aren't many born there who ever see to a proper education in their lifetime.
Then that makes Jack something of an outsider both here and in the East End. To think that wherever he goes, he's treated the same. I wonder if being too pitiful or too fortunate is all the same to him.
It's possible, yes.
Lupin appeared sad at the thought, but his eyes never left the page he was occupied with, so I continued with my own research. Soon after, I happened to find one name in particular that stood out from the rest. Henry Miller's. Haven't I heard this name before? Millers? The document I had in hand appeared to be a directory of some sort. Benefactor to the workhouses of London, and a ray of light to the orphans of the East End? My heart sparked in a way that said I had found something of value, and with glowing earnest, I read on.
What is it, Miss Whiteley? Did you find something?
I did. It's this Henry Millers here.
That must be Jack's father, the one who adopted him when he was a child. I don't know much about him other than bits and pieces here and there. He's known for taking children from the workhouses and granting them an education if they have the aptitude for it, or so I've heard.
Is that so? I should write this down then, just in case. I scribbled down everything of importance in mind quickly so I could move on to the next passage, though I was sure to do so neatly. Jack is certainly fortunate to be able to attend the academy. For the other children in the East End, all they can pray for is any job they find that may help them live another day. What sort of suffering did that entail? How lonely was it? I could not imagine the weight, and trying was enough to frighten me.
Miss Whiteley, may I ask you something?
What is it, Lupin?
It's about the culprit in the Whitechapel murders.
Then it's been on your mind too?
As a detective, of course. I should hope I'm interested. You can't turn a corner without hearing some new theory being whispered about. A poor person, someone killing for sport, a man revenging upon prostitutes. And then there are those who suspect Jack.
Oh, he's in a serious pose.
You're his schoolmate, but what do you think as a fellow budding detective?
He watched me closely, as if to observe and counter my hesitations were I to answer falsely. I thought sternly to myself before answering. Oh boy, what's it gonna be? Is he Jack the Ripper? I suppose... I don't think he's Jack the Ripper. The question is, do I think Jack the Ripper is our Jack? And I don't think so. The way they murder and who they murder is completely different. He didn't ask me if I think Jack's a murderer or a killer, in which case, yes. But he's not Jack the Ripper. He's the Silk Hatter. It's not him. Jack the Ripper is not Jack Millers. That's what I think.
That's lovely. I think that too. Still, why do you think that?
Because he has my heart. Well, because I believe in him. He simply isn't a man who would do something so awful.
Oh, of course. Pardon me for asking. Certainly, Jack must have grown content to face the ugliest parts of this city.
It can be ugly, yes.
Or more accurately, I suppose, is that he's never been given the freedom to see how beautiful it is. What a tragedy.
Lupin? Ah, the beauty. The beauty came out.
Don't mind me. I was talking nonsense.
Our minds were both thoroughly filled with new facts and findings, and as we couldn't bear to fit in any more, we said our goodbyes and retired for the evening. All the boys trying to make plays here. Watson, Holmes, Lupin. Akachi, it just occurred to me, before I started this actually, I have not seen Akachi or Kobayashi during this entire chapter. They've had nothing to say about Jack, and I find that very odd. Like, where did they go? Are they on a ship right now? Like, where did they go? I'm very sus. I felt we'd become close after our letters and time spent together. Now look at me. I didn't know anything about him. The places he's lived in, the things he's seen, or the horrors he's endured. My body grew heavier as I walked down the academy corridor. I'd become increasingly uncomfortable with my ignorance. Each piece of his history I'd uncovered pressed upon my unconscious mind, and the more conscious I became, the more powerless I knew I'd been all along. What can I do for him? Is there anything? Anything at all? I couldn't dismiss the gloom building within me. Oh! Yet by God's grace, I'd managed to wander to the one place that would give me some solace. I thought of when we were sitting together and the way he moved clumsily just so I could be next to him. Jack and I have been exchanging our letters here ever since we met. The courtyard was beautiful to me, though less so without him there, and he wouldn't be there now. Aww. What made me choose to walk through it, then? Maybe he left you a letter. Day gave way slowly to evening, and evening to the still of night. The courtyard made no sound, and so the grass crunched even with my soft steps. I stopped at the tree Jack was always sleeping under. I knew he wouldn't be here. Why would he? Indeed, why? Nobody was there. I knew that full well the moment I approached. My chest began to tighten, not with gloom, but with another sort of ill desperation entirely. Of course there isn't. I placed my hand along the bark. Coarse as it was pleasant to the touch. The texture reminded me of Jack. Ah, yes, coarse Jack. I took what we had for granted. Giving him letters, my smiles when he responded, our sitting together, our idle chats. They were all I wanted. Jack. Nothing came of whispering his name. No one was there to give me a smile. No one was there to respond. I was still alone. I want to believe in you, Jack. But I don't know anything about you. What meaning was there in the time we spent? The more the questions surfaced, the further away the answers seemed. They caught in my throat, and I bit my lip and swallowed to stop any fruitless quivering. I don't like this. I don't want to sit here behaving as a piteous coward, living my nights in fear. It's the last thing I want. Oh, Jack, where have you gone? Suppressing the urge to cry, I reached for a letter sheet from my bag. Leave him a letter. Oh, hello.
And so ends your brief yet blissful life as a student. You must already miss it.
No, not at all.
What came of it? Did you make any friends? Did you enjoy your lessons?
They weren't no matter. All I did was fulfill my mission.
Mission, you say? Now this is a surprise. I wasn't aware you knew what your mission was.
Colonel Moran eyed Jack as a predator would its prey as it backed into a corner.
Well, speak up. Why were you sent to the academy?
Yes, sir. It was to observe the actions of Arrington Academy, seeing as it has connections to Her Majesty and the police. Just as well, I was to gain a full understanding of its current student body and graduates.
My, you are absolutely correct. I'm very pleased.
Thank you, sir.
I shall reiterate, Jack. I sent you there not so you could run amok with friends, nor so you could become a detective in the spirit of Sherlock Holmes. I wish to supply Holmes the devil's fury and revenge. No doubt his son is dear to him.
I've paid special attention to the company Holmes keeps to that end. I hope my reports have been satisfactory.
I found them a delight, even. I could not ask for a finer son. So loyal, so intelligent, so brave. Though you would do well to remember to stay beneath my boot.
Ugh.
The air surrounding Jack contracted and bound him. So tight was the pressure that he thought it would soon sink into his flesh. He was acquainted with this sensation. In contrast to the burn, the chill of sweat pulled at his spine and spread across his back so that he felt every muscle stand at attention. The colonel was livid. The reason was no secret to Jack. The organization had rules, and he chose to break one. He knew this information would eventually come to light. It always did, but he hadn't thought it would be so soon. But what if he were wrong? It was entirely possible that his guilt led him to the wrong conclusion. Something else could have provoked Colonel Morin. A number of things could have done it. Any number.
That was a shameful failure on your part, you know. I still feel as though I were told some jest. A little girl catching you in the midst of murder? What's this? Did you think I wouldn't know? You aren't the only dog I have lapping from my palm. There is no such thing as keeping a secret from me. Do you understand?
Aw, he looks so sad.
Yes, sir. Forgive me. I shouldn't have been so careless.
You have done away with countless traitors to date. Were you to ever be seen in the act of murder, you were to dispose the witness in tandem. You should be well aware of this.
I am.
You are? How peculiar. Then what should you have done when you were seen by Emily Whiteley, the detective with a ring from Her Majesty? You should have killed her, taken her by the throat, and strangled her till she breathed her last. Would that not be the assumption for one in your position? One must ponder, then, why you allowed her to run free. The act itself is unforgivable. It's a betrayal to not only me, but the organization.
But...
Could you not go through with it? Has she become a dear friend to you? No response. I never imagined the day would come when you chose to protect a girl from me. Well, fear not. You are my child, and I'm not a man without compassion. I found you, an orphan, slaving away at a slaughterhouse. I noticed you, a boy of vast potential, skinning rabbits as if in a trance. I saved you, a husk of bone, gave you food, cloth, shelter, and education. You were raised as my own. And so it is time you proved your worth. You have until Sunday.
Jack nodded.
No one else happened to see you, did they?
No, only her.
Of course it was. Very well, then. It's a lesson learned for me as well, I suppose. I expected your senses to remain sharp, but even you grow tender if you bask in the warmth of the outside world long enough. I don't want to toss you aside. Remember, the clock is ticking. With every second you fritter away, the situation becomes worse. You must rectify the problem with all due haste.
Yes, sir.
Jack said only what was proper, but he could not accept it. Kill Emily Whiteley? Could he do that? His mind ebbed in painful waves, like that of ripples from a pebble dropped in water. Aw, he loves her. My heart.
Emily Whiteley. What if I...
What if you what? What if you what? Write her a letter? Now cozily in my bedroom, after night had long draped the sky, I gathered my notes on the East End murders to read through once more. I had a healthy amount to review, both the facts and articles I had copied by hand, as well as newspaper clippings from each morning made for plenty. Workhouses are homes for the homeless. They are built by the state to provide salvation to the truly needy in society, including those who have grown weak from sickness, injury, or alcoholism. To be accepted into one, an official application is required. Should you be accepted and can endure working under the strict eye of its staff, you may be permitted food and medicine together with a place to live and sleep. The work itself, however, is exceptionally difficult, and the food is barely enough to stave hunger, leading some to question whether they can be seen as salvation. I soon found my eyes were growing tired from all there was to absorb. Jack did mention that his life was one of poverty, as well as that it was one working under watch. Perhaps he really has lived in a workhouse. I need to study the Ripper case a bit more tonight too, if I'm able. Next, I reach for the notebook of my collected newspaper clippings. Drat, my pitcher is empty. I'd wanted another drink before bed. As I stepped out of my room to fill the pitcher myself, I ran into Pendleton.
My lady, is something the matter? I hadn't expected you would still be awake.
Nothing's wrong. I was just reading some excerpts from the paper.
Were you now? You haven't perchance been reading the ones related to the Ripper case, have you?
I'm sorry, but that's exactly it. It's been those and past articles featuring similar cases from the East End and its surrounding areas.
Unbelievable. I thought I told you to stay away from that case.
You did, and I haven't been near the East End since. Here, this is an article about workhouses there. They're national welfare and work facilities that provide food and a place to sleep for their inhabitants. But see here! Their conditions are so harsh, and the work is such that many die from exhaustion or illness.
I've heard such things, yes. However, the East End is stretched to its limits in people who have no work, no family, and no means by which to live. If not for the workhouses, there would be even more dying of starvation than there already is.
I understand that, certainly. With this in mind, may I ask a favor of you? Would it be difficult to retrieve a list of all the people who have entered one?
Why?
I should like to know if either of these two names are registered. I handed Pendleton a small scrap of paper.
Jack Millers and Henry Millers. You'd like me to look into these?
If Pendleton happened to find them on my behalf, then I would finally have a roundabout way of seeing if Jack was safe. Please do. And don't tell anyone that you are. Not Scotland Yard, not Holmes, and none of the other servants.
Very well. But may I ask where you found the name Henry Millers?
Well, Jack Millers is a schoolmate of mine. And Henry Millers is the name of the man who adopted him after he was orphaned. Do you recognize the name?
I believe I do. If it's the man I'm thinking of. I digress. I will look into it presently.
Thank you.
I do feel the need to mention, however, that this comes a bit too close to the case for my comfort. I beg that you stay further away and leave the rest to the yard.
All right. Northeast of the mansion sits Tower Bridge over the Thames. The Tower of London, too. If one were to keep traveling in that direction, they would eventually reach the East End. We're so far apart now. But I still have faith in you, Jack. And I shan't tarry. I want to help you, however I can. I should have written so in my letter. I feel now as though I only put my immediate thoughts to paper. There was nothing more to do, and I had grown tired. All manner of useless ideas circling in mind, I climbed into bed and welcomed a peaceful sleep. Not a sound was to be heard at Harrington Academy. Its grounds were coated in a typical winter night's frost. Cool-colored shadows appeared only at the behest of the moon, and even the air was congested with a cold jaggedness that made every intake of breath sting like icicles piercing the lungs. The only movement came from a lone figure in the courtyard. The moon, in its benevolence, gave him a pretty silhouette of silver.
I didn't think I'd come back here again.
Jack stopped briefly to look down at his hands. Her white handkerchief was still neatly wrapped around his injury.
Can I do it? Can I kill him? I have to do it myself, too.
He looked up again, a large familiar tree before him. It was a place he now associated with her. Guys, my heart.
She'd always try hard as she did to approach me without knocking me up, but she couldn't hide her footsteps as she were flying. She's strange. You'd have to be to want to be close to me.
Just then, he happened to see something small and white at the base of the tree.
This is her.
After so many exchanges, he knew the envelope by sight. Timidly, Jack plucked the letter from the base and opened it.
To you, who will find this letter.
I pray with all my heart that you will return to class soon. It's all right if you don't have a letter for me. I'm still content if I don't receive a reply. All I want is to see you again. I want to sit here with you. That's all I keep wishing for.
There isn't any rush to return the handkerchief. However long it takes, I'm happy to wait.
The sender did not write their name at the bottom. That was a very cleverly written letter, Emily. Good job. She didn't need to.
You.
No one heard him. Because he doesn't say her name. He always refers to her as you. Man, both of them whispering their names to the tree. My heart. He sorely wished in that moment someone could. The East End of London kept to a hopeless ritual. Murder did make one uneasy, but that changed little for its inhabitants. A prostitute was a creature of habit, be the client a murderer or a saint, so long as he had the coin. And one such woman, who was stepping into a terraced house in Whitechapel's Hanbury Street, was now to a point where she may well have considered betting a murderer for scraps. This ain't been my day. Not a bloomin' thing to eat since I rose with the sun. Before she could close the door or conclude her bitter mutterings, she felt someone reach from behind and cover her mouth. No! She resisted, but there was little point. Her assailant had cut a perfect line from her left ear to her right. Those mutterings would be her last, for he had robbed her of the ability to scream. Where are we? Are we inside? As she smacked against the ground, her assailant dived over her body in a hungry motion, the blade hacking into her with mad elegance to cut through stubborn flesh and spine. But then, quite curiously, they stopped. They spied a pretty handkerchief on her form and, appearing inspired, used it as a clumsy scarf to keep head and body as one. Ooh. That was not to say violent pleasures were fully abstained. They drew a line from chest to abdomen, cracking through the sternum just to satisfy their ears with the melody of broken bone, and dismissed with her intestines over her right shoulder before rummaging bare-handed through organs and removing prized parts. The body was now more rosy than pale, and it did not take long for the handkerchief to change from ink-blotted to completely soak. The murderer suspected the pattern would have been considered fashionable by fellow rouge-lipped tarts, a final parting gift worth considering for the next one as well. Ugh. Well, that was gruesome. Scotland Yard arrived on the scene when it was still a black night, but technically already the next day. Inspector Lestrade scrunched his face in disappointment as he saw the body.
Christ, not another one!
I'm afraid so. It was too late by the time she was found.
When was that?
Supposedly not long after the great clock at Christ Church in Spitalfields chimed 6. There are 2 brass rings along with a few farthings at her feet. I assume they belonged to the victim. Do you suppose the handkerchief was hers too? The one around her neck?
Most likely. A perplexing step after slitting her throat and removing the organs. It's the only thing preventing the complete decapitation of the head as far as I can observe. It could be they wish to minimize blood splatter from the arteries. Blood would be an issue regardless, but the less evidence the better. And fine work they did of that. Again, they have avoided leaving evidence that would incriminate them at the scene. I propose this handkerchief was bound to that end, as a means to avoid leading us to them. Do you concur?
Something still strikes me as odd. The more time the killer spends defiling the body, the greater the odds of being caught. They've never gone this far with previous victims.
Ah, yes, very true. But what if this was what they've always intended and they merely ran out of time? what if this has some meaning to our killer? Enough that they would risk being caught.
Such as to set an example or to threaten someone.
I'd say so. Or they simply kill for pleasure.
This victim is another penniless prostitute. We can conclude money is no motivator.
Both father and son's eyes went from observing the body outward to its surroundings, searching for clues. Bystanders who happened to be wandering the streets before waking hours noticed the police presence and gathered for a closer look.
It is truly regrettable that even after having so many men patrol the area, we still weren't able to catch him. Regrettable, but time does not wait. I shall have to take another look at the patrol routes.
I don't understand. Could this really be Jack's work? Is Jack the Ripper our Jack Miller's? Could that man be capable of murdering in such an inhumane way? I'm at a loss. The possibility still lingers, but... Listen, Holmes. You remember when we visited with Emily, don't you? It wasn't that long ago, so yes, she went missing. When I first found her, she seemed particularly anxious. It felt as though she were hiding something from us. Watson, why didn't you say this early? Well, you know, she was going to such lengths to keep it hidden. It didn't feel right to tell anyone about it. And when I asked, she said nothing. I could have imagined it. And if I did, that would be nice. But if she happened to see something... We're not to allow her near this area again, however. Remember? Oh, I do. She'll be all right. So long as Pendleton and us are with her, and as long as she never comes here again.
Is that the end? Whew, that was heavy.